You know that smell that hits you when you walk into a hospital? That antiseptic burn that tries to mask something deeper, something wrong? That's what Meridian Pharmaceuticals smelled like every morning at 6 a.m. Except instead of healing people, we were slowly poisoning them, one contaminated batch at a time. I'm Elma Rodriguez, and I worked quality control at that place for 8 years. Started as a lab tech making $14 an hour, testing samples that came down from production like Russian roulette in petri dishes. Worked my way up to senior QC analyst, mostly because I had this annoying habit of actually reading the test results instead of just signing off on them. The red flags weren't subtle. When you're testing pharmaceutical compounds and half your samples are coming back with bacterial contamination levels that would make a gas station bathroom blush, you notice. When production schedules are so tight that your supervisor tells you to retest until it passes, you notice. When the sterile room isn't actually sterile because maintenance has been postponed indefinitely, you definitely notice. But here's the thing about pharmaceutical manufacturing, everything looks legitimate from the outside. We had FDA certifications mounted on every wall like participation trophies. We had cleanroom protocols printed on laminated cards. We had safety meetings where they served donuts and talked about continuous improvement, while the air filtration system behind them wheezed like a dying accordion. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was trying to keep insulin from killing diabetics. The wake-up call came on a Tuesday in March. I was running routine stability tests on batch 47392, a diabetes medication that was supposed to ship to 3 states by Friday. The bacterial count was so high it looked like I'd swabbed the floor of a subway station. I ran it again. Same result. Third time, because maybe the equipment was having a bad day. Nope. This batch was contaminated enough to hospitalize half of Ohio. I walked straight to my supervisor Marcus, a guy whose main qualification was surviving 2 layoffs and having a mustache that belonged in a 1980s cop show. He was eating a gas station burrito and scrolling through fantasy football stats like the fate of insulin-dependent Americans wasn't sitting on his desk. Batch 47392 is contaminated, I said, sliding the test results across his desk. Bacterial count is 847 times the acceptable limit. He glanced at the numbers, then at me, then back at his phone. Run it again. I ran it 3 times. Run it until it passes, Elma. We ship Friday. That's when I knew I wasn't working for a pharmaceutical company anymore. I was working for a criminal enterprise with a corporate logo. I documented everything. Not in their system. I learned early that digital records at Meridian had a mysterious way of disappearing faster than free pizza in a break room. I kept a notebook. Old school, black ink, dated entries. Every contaminated batch, every shortcut, every time Marcus told me to find a way to make it work. The pattern was sickening. Literally. We'd get production schedules that were physically impossible to meet safely. The sterilization cycles would get cut short. The filtration systems would get maintenance deferrals. And when the inevitable contamination showed up in my tests, I'd get pulled into meetings where they'd explain how I was misinterpreting the data or being too conservative with standards. They didn't fire me. They did something worse. They promoted me. Elma, said Janet Morrison, the plant director, in her corner office that smelled like vanilla candles and denial. We're creating a new position. Senior Quality Liaison. You'll be working more closely with production to ensure seamless integration between departments. Translation, we're putting you in charge of making our problems disappear. The new office came with a door that locked, a computer with enhanced access, and a very clear understanding that my job was to be the company's pharmaceutical fairy godmother, wave my wand and make contamination magically turn into compliance. I played along. Smiled in meetings. Nodded when they talked about process optimization and efficiency metrics. But every night, I went home and fed my evidence files like they were hungry pets. Every doctored test result, every falsified stability report, every batch that shipped with contamination levels that would make a CDC epidemiologist weep. The break point came when I got a call from my cousin Maria. She's diabetic, has been since she was 12. Takes insulin every day to stay alive. She was in the hospital. Elma, she said, voice shaky through the phone. The doctors think it's my insulin. They're saying there might be a contamination issue. People are getting sick. I hung up and sat in my car for 20 minutes, shaking. Because I knew exactly which batches had shipped to her area. I had the test results. I had the contamination data. I had watched my own company poison my own family. That night, I didn't go home. I went back to the lab and started copying everything. Every file, every test result, every email thread where management discussed acceptable risk levels for human medication. I worked until 3 a.m., backing up 8 years of evidence to drives I'd hidden in places even I sometimes forgot about. But I wasn't done building my case. I was done being complicit. I found Dr. Sarah Chen through a pharmaceutical industry forum. She was a former FDA inspector who'd gone independent, consulting for companies that actually wanted to follow safety protocols. Her profile picture was her holding a clipboard in front of a clean room, and her bio said she specialized in regulatory non-compliance identification. The email I sent her was short: I work for a pharmaceutical company that's been knowingly shipping contaminated medications for years. I have proof. People are dying. She called me 6 hours later. Elma? I got your message. How bad are we talking? $30 million in contaminated shipments over 2 years. Diabetes medications, blood pressure pills, antibiotics. We've been cutting sterilization cycles by 60% and falsifying test results to meet shipping deadlines. There was a long pause. Do you have documentation? I have everything. Don't send it yet. I need to make some calls. This is going to get very serious very quickly. She was right. Within a week, I had a secure portal to upload my evidence to the FDA's Office of Criminal Investigations. Within 2 weeks, I had federal investigators asking me questions I'd been dying to answer for years. The hardest part wasn't gathering evidence or contacting authorities. It was going to work every day knowing that every batch I approved was a potential death sentence for someone's grandmother, someone's child, someone's cousin Maria. I kept my head down and my mouth shut at work. Smiled at Janet's safety meetings. Nodded when Marcus explained new efficiency protocols. But inside, I was counting down the days until justice knocked on our cleanroom door. The FDA showed up on a Thursday at 8:47 a.m. I wasn't there. I'd taken a personal day, officially for family obligations. Unofficially, I was sitting in my apartment watching the news coverage of federal agents walking through the same corridors where I'd spent 8 years trying to keep people alive. My phone exploded with texts. Did you know FDA was coming? Are you seeing this? Holy shit, Elma, they're everywhere. I watched the live stream of investigators carrying boxes of evidence out of the building. The same building where Janet had her vanilla-scented office and Marcus ate gas station burritos while approving contaminated insulin. By noon, the headlines were everywhere: federal raid shuts down pharmaceutical plant. By 2 p.m., the number dropped: $30 million in contaminated medications seized. That's when they started calling me a rebel. The company's PR statement, released through their law firm, painted me as a disgruntled employee with a history of procedural non-compliance. They said I'd been counseled multiple times for overly aggressive quality interpretations and had been recently disciplined for insubordination. Every word was a lie, and I had the emails to prove it. The lawsuits started within weeks. Patients who'd been hospitalized. Families who'd lost loved ones. Doctors who'd prescribed medications thinking they were sterile and safe. My documentation became the backbone of every case, the timeline that connected contaminated batches to specific health outcomes. Dr. Chen called me a month after the raid. Elma, I want you to know, your evidence saved lives. We traced 17 hospitalizations directly to batches you'd flagged as contaminated. Without your records, we never would have made those connections. Maria called me too. She was out of the hospital, switched to a different insulin manufacturer, feeling better. I don't know what you did, she said, but thank you. I didn't tell her what I'd done. I didn't need to. She was alive, and that was enough. The executives started disappearing like smoke. Janet Morrison, the plant director with the vanilla candles, announced her resignation to pursue other opportunities. Marcus, the fantasy football supervisor, was reassigned to a non-operational role. The VP of manufacturing, a guy who'd once told me that perfect is the enemy of profitable, was suddenly unavailable for comment. The company folded within 6 months. $30 million in fines, hundreds of millions in lawsuit settlements, and a criminal investigation that led to federal charges against 3 executives. The plant was sold to a scrap metal company, and the building that once housed contaminated medication production now houses absolutely nothing. I testified in 11 different court cases. 11 times, I sat in rooms full of lawyers and judges and grieving families, and I explained how a pharmaceutical company had chosen profit over human lives. How they'd shortened sterilization cycles, ignored contamination warnings, and shipped medications that were more dangerous than the diseases they were supposed to treat. Every time I spoke, I thought about Maria in that hospital bed. I thought about the insulin vials I'd tested, the ones that came back contaminated, the ones that shipped anyway because we ship Friday. They called me a rebel because I refused to let people die quietly. Because I documented the lies, preserved the evidence, and refused to look away when my company chose money over medicine. But I wasn't rebelling against anything. I was just doing my job the way it was supposed to be done. Testing medications to make sure they were safe. Reporting contamination when I found it. Refusing to falsify results because someone's production schedule was more important than someone's life. The hardest part about being a whistleblower isn't the retaliation or the stress or the legal battles. It's knowing that while you're building your case, people are still getting hurt. While you're documenting evidence, contaminated medications are still shipping. While you're waiting for justice, someone else's cousin is in the hospital because your company values efficiency over human lives. But sometimes, the only way to stop a system that's killing people is to be patient enough to bury it with its own paperwork. Sometimes, the most rebellious thing you can do is tell the truth and let the consequences fall where they may. I don't work in pharmaceuticals anymore. I do consulting now, helping companies build actual quality control systems instead of quality control theater. I sleep better at night, knowing that the medications I test are actually safe for the people who need them. And when I get thank you notes from patients who didn't get sick, from families who didn't lose loved ones, from doctors who can prescribe medications without wondering if they're contaminated, I remember why I kept that notebook. Why I documented everything. Why I refused to shut up when shutting up would have been easier. Because some things are worth being called a rebel for. Like making sure insulin doesn't kill diabetics. Like ensuring that medicine actually heals instead of harms. Like believing that people's lives are more valuable than production schedules. They wanted me to be a team player. Instead, I became the opposing team. And when the game was over, the scoreboard told the truth. $30 million in contaminated medications exposed, executives in federal custody, and a pharmaceutical plant that will never poison anyone again. Sometimes, being a rebel just means refusing to be complicit. Sometimes, it means caring more about strangers' lives than your own career. Sometimes, it means sitting in a lab at 3 a.m., copying files, building a case, and waiting for the day when truth finally gets its turn to speak. That day always comes. You just have to be patient enough to document it, brave enough to preserve it, and stubborn enough to make sure it's heard. The system taught me to stay quiet. Instead, I became the echo they couldn't silence. And when federal agents finally walked through those doors, all I had to do was hand them the evidence and let justice do what justice does best. The truth doesn't need permission. It just needs proof. And sometimes, it needs someone willing to be called a rebel for 8 years while they gather enough proof to shut down a $30 million lie. I was that someone. My name is Elma Rodriguez, and I turned a pharmaceutical company into a crime scene, one test result at a time.